My name is Rebecca Carey. I'm the Deputy Director of the REL. And I am delighted to welcome you to the Bridge event, Data Collection and Use, an Early Childhood Perspective. We will be starting in just a few minutes. Right now, I'm going to hand off this portion of the webinar to Jackie Barassa, the Alliance Facilitator for the Early Child Education Research Alliance. Well,
thank you, Rebby, for serving as today's greeter. This is Jackie Barassa, as Rebby said. I facilitate the Early Childhood Education Research Alliance, and I'm noticing that our participants represent several states, some from outside of our regional education area, and you also represent several different time zones. So thank you for joining us. Later on, we'll be joined by Claire Irwin, who is the Alliance researcher. Claire will be working during this webinar. She's working very hard to compile questions from all of you. So please make sure that you use the chat function if you have some questions. Later, she will summarize today's session. Here's a look at today's agenda. As you can see, we have 3 presenters. 20 minutes has been allotted for each presenter. Following each presentation, there will be a brief question and answer session. After all 3 presentations, we will engage in a collaborative discussion based on your questions. Here are the webinar goals for today. It's very important that we disseminate our study results and implications for what happened during that study. We hope that they will have some impact on the work that you're doing. We can also discuss the challenges and opportunities raised by the study and build knowledge about how specific implications are being addressed at the state and program levels. We have 3 presenters today. Jacqueline Zweig is a Senior Research Associate in the Research Evaluation and Policy Unit of Education Development Center, where she manages applied research and evaluation studies, conducts analyses of survey, administrative, and student outcome data, develops measures of teacher effectiveness, including value-added and growth percentile models, develops surveys and interview protocols to collect information on education topics identified by local and state education agencies, designs school-based data systems to collect information for the purposes of educator evaluation, and collaborates with multiple stakeholders to develop and conduct policy-oriented research. At REL Northeast Islands, Dr. Zweig serves as Manager of Applied Research, and in this capacity, she manages the applied research and evaluation studies for the REL, oversees project development and design to ensure that they meet the needs of research alliances, and manages the coordination and completion of research projects and serves as advisor on several of these projects. Today, Jackie will share her work as Principal Investigator and co-author of Status of Data Collection and Use in Early Childhood Programs, Evidence from the Northeast. Our second presenter, Judy Stevenson-Garcia, serves as an education specialist at the Rhode Island Department of Education. The scope of her work as project lead for the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge assessment project includes developing statewide systems of support for those responsible for assessing children ages birth through 5, increasing developmental screening rates, and developing and implementing a kindergarten entry assessment. Specific work related to these projects encompass developing and implementing assessment-related professional development and technical assistance for the state's early childhood workforce of child care centers, public preschool special education, state-funded preschool, family child care providers, and early intervention providers. She also develops and implements systems of support for state developmental screening efforts, which includes collaboration with the Department of Health. Judy also supports early learning programs to implement high-quality assessment practices with a focus on using formative assessment to drive instruction, and represents Rhode Island in a multi-state consortium to develop comprehensive K-3 formative assessment system with an embedded kindergarten entry assessment. State-specific work at this level includes engaging and communicating with relevant stakeholders, recruiting for and implementing professional development, and supporting district leaders and teachers as they prepare to implement the assessment. Judy is also a member of the Alliance's Core Planning Group. Andrea Wydell, our third presenter, is the Education Director of the Imagine Preschool in Warwick, Rhode Island. During her presentation, she will share information about her high-quality program. Her responsibilities include managing daily operations in accordance with Rhode Island Department of Education preschool standards, providing a supportive and reflective teaching environment for education staff, providing on-site training for teaching staff in conjunction with individual and program-wide professional development plans, conducting weekly reflective supervision meeting with all teachers, collaborating with teachers to build positive relationships with families, creating and maintaining collaboration with the Community College of Rhode Island and other partnering agencies, and leading an annual self-assessment that informs the continuous improvement plan. Andrea is also responsible for ensuring her program is in compliance at all times with the high-quality standards, including the Rhode Island Department of Education preschool standards and Bright Stars quality indicators. Welcome to our presenters, and Jackie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jackie. So this study was conducted in collaboration with the Early Childhood Education Research Alliance at REL NE, and I first want to acknowledge my co-authors, Claire Irwin, Jana Cook, and Josh Cox, as well as the important role of the advisory committee, who is made up of members of the Early Childhood Research Alliance, and they contributed both to the idea of the study, from providing helpful feedback and guidance on everything from the research questions to the way the tables were presented in the report. And to give you some background on this study, it grew out of the Research Alliance's interest in the relationship between early childhood education experiences and early learning outcomes. And in particular, Alliance members wanted to understand more about the association between the quality of early childhood experiences, the amount of exposure children have to early childhood education, also known as dosage, and children's academic and social emotional outcomes. However, while working with the Alliance members on this topic, we discovered that the data to do that type of study was often not available. So we decided to take a step back and look at what data preschools are actually collecting, how they're using it. This is particularly important to understand, given that many early childhood programs are facing increased pressure to collect data and to use that data to make decisions. So as a result, we developed this study, which focused on how early childhood education programs are collecting and using data, how they would like to use data, how they could use the data that they have, and the challenges they face in these efforts. The interviews and data analysis, which I'll discuss on the next slide, focused on the three domains, again prioritized by the Alliance: early learning outcomes, including math, reading, and social emotional, classroom quality measures, and the third is dosage, or the amount of exposure children have to early childhood education. So this slide contains the research questions that guided our study. This study is conducted using face-to-face interviews with a convenient sample of 7 preschools in a mid-sized city in the Northeast. We interviewed 1 teacher and 1 administrator from each of the schools. Our study team also analyzed data from 2 of the preschools to illustrate how preschools could use data to inform program-level decisions. In addition, we present information about the challenges that preschools face when analyzing their data. And the data that we collected from the 2 preschools focused again on those 3 key domains: early learning outcomes, which in this case was teaching strategies gold; dosage, which in this case was attendance and half day and full day; and classroom quality. Both programs use the ECHRS, which is the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale. One program also used the ARNET and the other used the CLASS. The study findings that I'll describe in the next few slides focus on data collection, and then it's followed by data use, and finally some challenges and considerations for using and analyzing data. So the first key finding was that the participating preschools used various systems, both externally and internally developed, to collect data on early learning outcomes, dosage, and classroom quality. So first, related to early learning outcomes, all the preschools reported using performance-based assessments of early learning outcomes. 4 of them used externally developed assessments, including Teaching Strategies Gold and the Work Sampling System. The remaining 3 preschools relied on internally developed systems for collecting child outcome data, and this included anecdotal notes or work samples for children's portfolios. The participating teachers also reported being supported in a variety of ways to collect early learning outcome data, and that included everything from formal trainings to administrator support. All preschool administrators also reported observing teachers to collect information about classroom quality. 3 of the preschools used ECHRS, 2 of which also used ARNET or CLASS. 1 developed their own instrument, which I'll discuss on the next slide. And 3 had more informal processes. To give a quote from one of the administrators who used a more informal process, she said, "I go around daily in the classrooms. I make sure that I know every child and every parent in the building, and I spend time. I'll watch the teachers. I'll give a little input." So that gives you an idea of the variety of ways that administrators were collecting information about classroom quality. And not surprisingly, all the preschools collected attendance data, which is one measure of dosage, and they collected that daily on all children. However, the process to collect that information again varied. In some cases, the teachers collected attendance data via hard copy pieces of paper, and then they would submit those to their administrators. And in some cases, those administrators would just put them into binders. And in other cases, they were entered into a database. There was only one preschool where a teacher entered attendance data directly into a database using a tablet. To show the variation in the strategies for collecting early learning outcome data, we created a chart that shows how 2 of the preschools approached this. And as you can see, one preschool used Teaching Strategies Gold, and the other one had an internally developed system. In her internally developed system, they came up with 6 domains, and you'll see that many of those domains are similar to that used in Teaching Strategies Gold, but there are some nuanced differences in the way that they categorize them. But in both cases, the teachers were taking notes, included information about the children in portfolios, and created progress reports. Similarly, this slide presents 3 ways that preschools collected information about classroom quality. The first preschool used ECHRS and CLASS. The second preschool had an internally developed scoring sheet with 4 domains that the administrator determined were particularly important, which was planning and preparation, classroom environment, interactions, and personal qualities. And then a third preschool talked about an open-ended form where they would fill out some of their observations and recommendations and provide that to the teachers. And again, you can see here that in all cases the teachers were observed. It was just that the process and the tools to capture and share that information back to the teacher varied. The second key finding focuses on data use. Administrators and teachers reported using early learning outcomes and classroom quality to inform instruction and practice. They talked about using the early learning outcomes to determine what they should work on with particular students, to track students' progress, and set learning goals. In terms of classroom quality, they really talked about using that to inform their practice and decide what they should work on in their classroom. And I included on this slide just one of the quotes. One thing to note is that teachers typically and administrators typically talked about using the data for individual students or individual teachers. There were less examples about using data for program level or classroom level examinations. Another way that these programs typically use data was to provide it to parents. So in particular, they would provide data on early learning outcomes and dosage to parents, but some had concerns about the best way to communicate that information to parents. For example, an administrator indicated that parents are given an abundance of information and it can be overwhelming for them. We also heard challenges in conveying complex information, including the data output from some commercially available systems in an easily accessible way so parents could understand what was being provided to them. 4 of the preschools wanted to link absenteeism to outcomes in order to demonstrate the importance of attending school to parents. When asked whether they wanted to collect additional data, most did not want to collect additional data. Only 1 teacher and 1 administrator from different schools indicated that there were specific data elements that they would like to collect that they didn't. And when asked whether the data they collected fulfilled the purposes that they were using it for, they indicated that that was true. So now by working with 2 of the preschool programs that provided data, and reflecting on the information we heard during the interview, we compiled some example tables and graphs that programs could use to inform program or classroom level decisions. And by working on those and with these programs, several challenges to doing data analysis emerged that are then described in the report in more detail. And these included the time and difficulty of combining multiple sources of data and the potential for multiple explanations for any observed trends. So in the next few slides, I'm just going to go through some of the graphs that are also in the report for ways to look at the data at a more holistic level. And so this first slide shows the absenteeism rate for these 2 preschools. You'll notice that the categories of chronically absent mean that the students missed between 10 and less than 20% of their days enrolled. And children who are excessively absent missed at least 20% of the days enrolled. And so by looking at this data at the program level rather than for an individual student, it could spur some new policies or practices to encourage students to attend. And in the report, we dig a little deeper by looking at the fluctuations by month in attendance. This second slide shows the average scores of teachers on the classroom assessment scoring system, which is the CLAS. This is a measure of the quality of classroom interactions. And what you can see here, for example, is that on average, the teachers are receiving higher scores on things like positive climate and behavior management and lower scores on average on language modeling and quality of feedback. One thing to note, negative climate is on the opposite scale, on the reverse scale, and so the teachers are doing quite well in that area. And so an administrator may want to look across classrooms to determine what type of professional development could be offered to all teachers. And in this case, they may focus more on language modeling than some of the other areas. And although there is a push for data-informed decision-making at the preschool level, and some administrators even articulated this interest in linking early learning outcomes to attendance data, the analysis really from these 2 programs really reveals that there may be challenges to combining and analyzing multiple sources of data. Some of those challenges include the fact that data may be housed in separate systems. There may not be unique identifiers. Some data may be missing, such as some of the items on an assessment. And so I'm not going to go into too much detail on this slide, but this diagram just describes the process to combine multiple sources of data. And in this situation, there weren't unique identifiers. And a final important note is just a caution that should be applied when examining any program-level data. You know, there can be many explanations for an observed trend. So in this case, we report the average teaching strategies gold scores for children who attended full day versus half day. And what you can see here is those who attended for a full day had higher scores than those for a half day. And so this descriptive analysis is helpful because it identifies an area that's worth exploring, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the difference is caused by half day versus full day attendance. And if you look at the next slide, you can see that the children who attended for the full day also had higher incomes, and although not reported here, they were also older. So there could be several other explanations for why scores may be higher. There are three key implications here for this study. I think the first one is about guidance, and I think there many programs would benefit from additional guidance on the effective methods for presenting information to parents, as well as successful data practices and structures. In terms of combining data from multiple systems, it's helpful to have unique IDs. Preschools could consider having an integrated system that captures all the information about children, so the assessment scores and the attendance are all in the same system or can be easily linked. A third option is a data governance plan, and I know many states have early learning data governance committees. And finally, I just want to make that cautious note that when you're looking at your program data, you just have to be cautious about the conclusions that you draw from your analyses. So I think I'll pause there. There are two reports that you can download from the website, and I think they are also in the download box at the bottom of your screen. This is my contact information if you have any questions. And I will turn it over, I think, to Jackie Barassa to help lead the discussion.
Thank you, Jackie. I know it's confusing because there are two Jackies. It happens to us all the time here. There are just a few interesting questions, and I think that we should probably take the time to ask them because they're specifically about the report. So one in the chat, there was one question about what happened to the original 7 in the preschool data collection. You mentioned that there were 7 that began the study. Why only 3 are reported here in this report?
Yes. So all 7 are included in the interview component of the report. In some of the tables, we just pulled out some examples of the variation in the ways that people were collecting or using data. So there were 7 teachers and 7 administrators who were interviewed. 2 of the preschools also provided data, so I would call those our case study preschools, and they provided data that we worked with them to extract that data and then analyzed it for the report.
Good, thank you. I think that's a really good clarification. Speaking of clarifications, could you clarify the definition of dosage that was used during the study?
Yeah, so we called dosage the amount of exposure that a child has to early childhood education. And 2 ways that we were able to calculate exposure given the data that we had. The first was through attendance, so the percent of days attended given the percent of days from the percent of days enrolled. So days attended divided by the days enrolled. And another way we thought about dosage was this half day versus full day.
Good, thank you. For the people who have posed these questions, if you have follow-up questions, maybe we can take them later when we do the collaborative discussion. Another question, what criteria were used to select the programs, and to what extent are they representative of the programs in their state or region?
Yes, so these programs are all center-based programs. They have at least 40 children, and they were in a mid-sized city in the Northeast. Given the fact that you have to agree to participate in an interview, and the interview was focused on data collection, the people who agree to participate in the interviews may have different perceptions of data collection than those who did not participate in the study.
And did you say, I'm sorry, I might have missed it, were they public or private preschools?
So they were all...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. These
Public
were
or private?
all... none of them were in a district. So they were all preschool centers that were, they were all center-based preschool centers, and they could be private, they could be nonprofits, but they all were large center-based programs.
And so you probably don't know if they had any state support or any children who were, can we assume, Jackie, that there were children who were subsidized in these programs?
Oh, absolutely. One is a federally funded preschool program. The other one is of the two preschools that provided data, one is a federally funded program. One is a private nonprofit which accepts vouchers and various forms of funding. These two preschools typically had lower income children who were mostly on subsidized.
Thank you. I do notice that there's one more question about data and communicating with families about data, but I'd like to hold that to the collaborative discussion and get everybody's perspective on that, because I think it goes beyond what happened in this study. So thank you, Jackie, and I hope you are staying for the collaborative discussion. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Judy Stevenson-Garcia so she can give us the state perspective from the state of Rhode Island.
Thanks, Jackie. I'm excited to have the opportunity to share with you a little bit about the work that we've been doing here in Rhode Island. And just to set the context for what I'll be presenting today, I'll let you know that we are a Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge state. So we received the grant in the first round, and so a large part of our work during the beginning years of our grant was to focus on aligning the policies and procedures of the various state agencies that work to support young children's learning and development. So in order to align our approach to assessment, as a lead agency, RIDE, or the Department of Ed, I'll refer to ourselves as RIDE here, we first worked to develop a vision and a purpose for assessment so that we could use that as a guide for all of our assessment work. And so we now have that as our kind of guiding document and foundation for all of the work that we do across the state in terms of assessment. So just to begin there with our vision and our purpose for assessment, before we could even get to thinking about supporting data collection and use in our various programs, we felt that it was really important to clarify our primary purposes for assessment. We knew that it was essential before we made any plans or decisions about assessment that we should be clear about our purposes, because without a clear purpose, we felt that our goal of developing a comprehensive assessment system and choosing appropriate assessment tools and methods wouldn't be possible. So what you see here obviously are not the only purposes for assessing young children, but they capture what we feel are the primary purposes in early childhood education. So our goal as a state here in Rhode Island is to develop a system of child assessment that identifies children's strengths, progress, and needs for these purposes. Making good decisions in the classroom in terms of teaching and learning, identifying children who may need further evaluation or intervention, and then also focusing on using child assessment to help programs improve their practices with the ultimate goal of increasing children's outcomes. And then directly connected to the purposes of assessment is the practice, or the how. And we've used these guidelines as a reference when planning our new systems of assessment. These relate directly to the process of collecting and using data. So first, one of our primary goals is to make sure that across all of our programs that all children are assessed in all domains. We want to make sure that programs understand the importance of measuring children's growth and development across all of these domains so that we have a comprehensive understanding of their development. We want to make sure that assessment instruments that are used with fidelity and for the purpose for which they're designed. That's been a huge piece of our work in redesigning some of our assessment systems here in the state. We want to make sure that we have a comprehensive understanding of what children know and are able to do, which means engaging others in the assessment process by gathering information from parents or other caregivers or specialists or support staff. So we want to make sure that there are multiple sources of data being used, and then also that data are used ethically to support children's growth. And then finally, we want to make sure that assessment information is communicated thoughtfully and with respect to children and families, obviously keeping with privacy guidelines, but also making sure that the communication is bidirectional and that families feel like they're engaged in the process. So just as a little bit of a context for the work, the purposes and guiding principles have been really essential because we are, this grant is a collaborative effort across 5 state agencies, and each agency has a different role in the early childhood community, but they also have some level of responsibility regarding assessment. So having a clear vision, purpose, and practice is helpful because all of the work that each agency does, we can work to support their policies and guidelines in aligning with that vision. So in terms of assessment, RIDE is the lead agency. We've set the vision and guidelines, and then we've also taken the lead in helping these state agencies align their assessment work to our vision. So at RIDE, we oversee the state pre-K program and the public school special education programs, and we also oversee statewide developmental screening for children ages 3 to 5. And then finally, we're responsible for developing and implementing a kindergarten entry assessment. So those are our key assessment projects at the Department of Ed. The Department of Health is responsible for developmental screening of children ages birth to 3. So we do this by supporting pediatric practices to increase their screening and referral rates in alignment with the Bright Futures recommendations for pediatricians, which sets an expectation for regular developmental screening of children at 9, 18, and 30 months. And then DCYF is our child care licensing agency. So our state's licensing standards do include requirements regarding communication with families about assessment and screening. The Department of Human Services holds the contract for our tiered quality rating and improvement system vendor. So they're responsible for overseeing and supporting the quality improvement of our child care and family child care programs. And our QRIS does include standards regarding assessment. And then the Executive Office of Health and Human Services oversees early intervention. And so one of our really inspiring projects that we've worked on here has been to collaborate with EOHHS to align our assessment practices and policies for programs serving children birth to 5 with disabilities. These are our main projects under the Race to the Top grant, and while you can see down the list a little bit, developing and supporting effective early childhood assessment is a project all on its own. Each of the other projects also has a component that involves assessment. So, so I've been busy, but we've done work in terms of improving the quality of early learning programs, and then the development of our QRIS system. Again, those standards have expectations around assessment. We've done work related to our early learning and development standards so that our workforce is better prepared to understand how assessment measures children's progress toward those learning goals. And then we've done work with our data system developers to make sure they understand the types of data we'll be collecting and how we'll need to use it at the state level. And then finally, our workforce knowledge and competencies, we revised those as well to update and expand our expectations for our workforce in terms of assessment. So our first goal under our grant was really to revise and align our standards and expectations. We, prior to the grant, each agency had its own set of standards and expectations, but they weren't aligned, so often this led to confusion as programs very frequently interact with and are responsible to more than one agency. So we made sure that we went through and revised, updated, and aligned our documents so that programs are now receiving a consistent and clear message in terms of all of our standards and expectations, specifically here, though, about assessment. And there are three major sets of standards that fall under, well, there's three categories, basically: program standards, workforce standards, and then standards that apply to children. In terms of our program standards, as I mentioned before, we have DCYF has the licensing regulations, and those are the basic health and safety standards for our center-based and family child care programs. And the analogous document to that for our public school programs is our basic education program regulations. So those are our foundational regulations. They do address at some level expectations for assessment in terms of communicating with families about assessment information and helping families to understand the importance of regular developmental screening. The Bright Stars is our QRAS quality indicator system, and that applies to all programs serving young children. This is a series of quality indicators which programs use as a part of their quality improvement efforts and include multiple indicators related to assessment. And then at the highest level of quality, we have our RIDE program approval standards, which apply to programs serving preschool and kindergarten age students. And both the QRAS process and the RIDE approval process do include classroom observation tools as well. So Eckers and CLAS are used as classroom observation tools, and for the QRAS, there are benchmarks set for average Eckers scores at different levels of the rating scale. For our RIDE approval standards, we have multiple standards that relate to assessment directly, and they're divided into two different focuses. One is on what the program should do to support child assessment at the program level, and then what the teachers do at the classroom level to support child assessment. Our state-funded pre-K programs are required to meet the CECE standards, and other pre-K and kindergarten classrooms and programs are eligible to apply for approval as well if they're able to document that they meet these standards. Part of our work was to revise and update our workforce knowledge and competencies. So these are the subcategories under assessment for teachers, what we expect them to know and be able to do. We provide levels of competencies and knowledge for each of the subdomains so teachers can understand the growth trajectories for each of the subdomain and use the knowledge and competencies as a way to both track their progress as a professional, but also to focus more on their professional development needs and what they would like to continue to grow in terms of their understanding of assessment. And while not directly related to assessment, the revision of our early learning and development standards has impacted our assessment work in that it has provided a great opportunity for us to talk about assessment and instruction for all of our children. So the revision to the standards expanded them from the previous version was just for 4-year-olds, and we've now expanded them so that they include birth to age 60 months. And where this, I think, has had a great impact has been on our infant and toddler community. So it's led to an increased focus on supporting our infant and toddler teachers and also our early intervention providers in terms of helping them understand what children should know and be able to do in the early years, and also best approaches to assessing and measuring children's progress toward those learning goals. So at the state level, we've been engaged in several areas of work to support moving our programs toward the vision and goals that we have set for ourselves. Our state pre-K and special education programs, because we are responsible for them here at RIDE, our focus has been on supporting the valid and reliable implementation of Teaching Strategies Gold, which is required for both our state-funded pre-K and special education programs. In addition, so while gold is not mandated or required for community programs, we do have an expectation in our QRAS that at the highest level, programs use a valid and reliable tool. And so one of the things that we've been able to do is to provide an incentive for programs to use Teaching Strategies Gold by granting them access to our state rate, which is heavily discounted. So in order to access that state rate, programs sign an agreement with us. They agree to use Teaching Strategies Gold with fidelity, and then in exchange, the state has access to their data that we use at an aggregate level to plan professional development opportunities around assessment. And then through our Race to the Top grant, we were able to establish the Center for Early Learning Professionals, and some of the work that is underway there that supports our community and family child care programs. We have an assessment professional development system that is going to be rolling out this fall, which provides PD that's focused on our levels 1 and 2 in our workforce knowledge and competencies, which is the lowest levels, our basic intro to assessment for our workforce. And then they also provide, they will be providing technical assistance for our higher level teachers that are really engaged in the process of assessment, our ed coordinators and administrators. And then finally, we have the opportunity to provide some funds to programs to purchase technology, which is going to be used to enhance and support high-quality assessment practices. We've also been working to support the use of data to inform program improvement and to support teaching and learning with the goal of improving child outcomes. Our CECE approval process requires programs to have a comprehensive assessment framework, and so that framework includes methods by which teachers will collect and use assessment information, as well as plans for how programs will use data to inform professional development plans and program improvement. And as I mentioned before, we also use ECRS in class, the observational tools, during the approval process. And we encourage programs to use class data as a means to inform their professional development plans and understand what teachers need to support their instructional practices in the classroom. At the state level, we use gold data at the aggregate level to inform our understanding of what professional development and technical assistant needs are out in the field. And this is both in terms of what teachers document in terms of children's progress, but also how teachers and administrators use the system, the GOLD system. So we look at some of that data as well. So not just child data, but also the use of the system itself to understand where there may be gaps in using GOLD or in understanding how the assessment tool works. And then finally, with our state pre-K program, we do engage in an external evaluation process, which includes a research organization conducting classroom quality observations, such as CLASS or the ECRS, along with standardized child assessments. And so that data gives us information about the overall quality of our state pre-K programs, and also the impact that those programs are having on children's outcomes, the children who are participating. And we also use that data to inform our own state-level thinking around the professional development and technical assistance needs in our states. So all of this work that we've been engaged in over the past few years has really led us toward thinking much more critically about assessment and has moved us from simply asking what works or what do people think works best in early childhood to really carefully thinking and considering the various contexts in which children are being served. So we are looking at how the care and education environments differ, how the services that are provided, how they differ, and then also how the children in the different programs, what that means in terms of what's best for assessment and understanding the data that's collected. And then also thinking about how these different contexts impact the purpose and practice of assessment. And so we discovered that it's not one size fits all. We need different approaches for our early intervention providers who are largely serving children in their homes, as opposed to our center-based programs who may be serving a wide range of children, or our family child care providers who are working with different age levels and different sizes, different groups of children. So we've really taken our vision and our guidelines for assessment, and then we've been able to think critically about the different contexts and what that means in terms of assessment. And we've also had to address some complex issues related to understanding what exactly is working and how do we define what we mean when we say works in terms of assessment. And so part of that, we've engaged with our state pre-K program in terms of what is working or what it means to work in terms of assessment, and specifically using Teaching Strategies Gold. What does it look like when it's working? And then if it's not, what can we do to address those needs? We're far from finished in terms of our goals of implementing a statewide comprehensive system of assessment, but we do feel like we have made substantial progress in terms of establishing an aligned vision for assessment in the state, and then developing supports for programs across the state in implementing high-quality assessment practices. So that's where we're at. Jackie?
I thought you were going to move. So Judy, we have a couple of questions from participants. Some are very specific. So let's start with this one about TS Gold. So do you want to give just a little bit of an explanation about TS Gold and then alignment to the curriculum that's being used in those programs?
So Teaching Strategies Gold is the assessment tool that we use for our state-funded pre-K programs. We do not have a state requirement for the curriculum that's used in our programs, so the programs are allowed to choose their own curriculum. We've evaluated our curricula for alignment with our early learning and development standards, and we've also aligned Teaching Strategies Gold with our early learning and development standards. So as long as programs are using curriculum and assessment, as long as programs are using curricula that are aligned with our early learning and development standards, that's fine. And then they use Teaching Strategies Gold, which has been aligned with our standards as well.
Good, thank you. We have a few more related to TS Gold, so I'll just go through them. Does TS Gold provide a vertical scale, and could it be used to measure student growth as part of a comprehensive evaluation process?
So Teaching Strategies Gold does provide a scale, a learning trajectory scale, in terms of using it to measure student growth. And specifically as part of a comprehensive evaluation process, that's not how we use it here in Rhode Island, because the primary purpose of it is to inform instruction. That is our goal, and that's what we use it for. But that said, we are still in the process of developing an evaluation process for our teachers in our state pre-K programs. And so that's yet to be seen, what data will actually be used to inform that process.
And one more about Gold. Is your evaluation of the assessment, what is your evaluation of the assessment tool, especially the Gold? How did you arrive at that?
I wasn't here when Gold began, when we began implementing Gold at the state level. I would say that our expectation in our QRAS at the highest level is that programs use a validated tool that's aligned with our standards. And so, if Gold didn't continue to fit that description, we probably would use something else. But it has been validated, and it does align with our early learning and development standards. And so our goal is to use an assessment tool that measures children's progress toward our learning and development standards. And so Gold fits that bill, so that's what we're using for now.
And staying within that vein, Judy, one of our participants wants to know if there's any data on student outcomes, including pre-reading skills or pre or post participation in the programs.
We will have that data. So our evaluation, so we have previous data from an earlier evaluation of our state pre-K program, but we have not yet started our new evaluation. So, but literacy skills will be included pre-post, and it will be a randomized study because the children in our program are randomly selected, and so we'll be able to look at compare the outcomes of children who participated in the program versus children who applied but were not selected for the program.
Okay, and the TS Gold data, is that shared with districts when students move on to kindergarten?
From our state pre-K programs and our preschool special education programs, it varies by district, but I think that is the goal, to have that data shared in some fashion with our school districts. I think one of the pieces of work that we have underway is developing or helping our school districts develop systems of transition that are more inclusive of information gathered by preschool programs, and especially in the next few years as we start to use a kindergarten entry profile, I think districts will really start thinking that information that they can gather from preschool programs might be valuable to the process of understanding what children know and are able to do when they enter kindergarten.
And I just have two more that I'd like to link together. Does every school in Rhode Island have pre-K, and are all pre-K teachers certified in early childhood education?
We have a very small state-funded pre-K program, so all school districts serve preschool children with disabilities, and then our state pre-K program is very small. It's only provided in our highest needs districts, and of those programs and classrooms, all of the teachers are required to be certified.
Good, thank you very much. I do think there are a few more questions. Maybe we can hold them to the collaborative discussion. And so now I'd like to introduce Andrea Wydell. And Andrea is going to be very specific about the preschool, Imagine Preschool in Warwick, where she works as the education director. Andrea, I'm turning it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jackie. So Imagine Preschool, we are a small preschool program. We have 2 classrooms. We're located at the Community College of Rhode Island. We're actually run by another lead agency, so it is a collaboration. One of our preschool classrooms is a state-funded pre-K program. So being a state-funded pre-K program, we have had a lot of opportunity for professional development for what Judy had referred to through RIDE, the Rhode Island Department of Education. What else about? So what assessment practices? What does it look like at Imagine, and what we've learned over the last 2 years, which have been really the main focus of the professional development and the support that we've received around assessment. And as all good early childhood programs, we definitely use authentic assessment practices. We use multiple sources of evidence, so anything from observations to a photographic evidence, work sample, or checklists. We use family interviews and put that all together to get a vision of the child. We try to assess children at all times and contexts of their daily activities, because as we know, that is how we assess children in the most reliable way. We make a great effort to use family input. We do so informally throughout the year, as well as when we sit down with families to review the data. We do that in form of a progress report, and we do sit down with families and review it, and then talk about goals, get family input at that point. That's actually something we're going to be working on this upcoming year, is getting family input more frequently in a more systematic manner. But all of that data we collect is all inputted into the reliable and valid online assessment system, which Judy had talked about as Teaching Strategies Gold. And as she said, that's really just the online system that helps teachers to really organize what they've collected. So assessment is always happening, not just the times of years when you want to report out to families, but that we're always doing assessment, and how we use assessment for many different reasons. It's not just for the sake of collecting it. So we are creating classroom and individual goals, seeing where the children are and where we want to move them, monitoring children's progress towards those goals once they're created. It definitely helps us inform curriculum, identifies children who might need a higher level of support, and it is definitely used as part of our program self-assessment. And it's not on here as part of teachers' own professional development as well. For example, maybe, might see kids aren't progressing so well in math, so that might mean that teacher might need some more understanding of how to do a high-quality math curriculum. So as I said, over the last 2 years, we've had lots of support from RIDE because of our pre-K classroom, our state-funded pre-K classroom that we have. And that support has really enabled us to really think carefully about assessment and how to manage it, because it is a big task, how to manage it with everything else you're managing and how to do it in a way that makes sense. So some of the things that we really learned from it, the first one being there has to be a plan for assessment. That you cannot just go in and just documenting the things that stick out or jump out at you, which is, I'm not sure about anybody else, but which is how we used to do it in the past. And it's really, there needs to be a plan for baseline data collection. When we don't know anything about the child, there's a lot of data to collect. So we plan over the first 2 to 3 months when that child enters our program, we have an assessment plan on what learning goals we're going to collect in information and when we're going to collect it, how we're going to collect it, who's thinking also of what can we collect from families, what can we collect that first visit, the first time they come in the door. I have on the downloaded files included our long-term assessment plan from last year, so people have a sense of what that might look like. Of course, I do think each program, it would be very individual on how you would set something like that up. Based upon that long-term assessment plan each week, then we get into a more detailed plan. The teachers, when they're planning, and sometimes I sit in on it as well, will then look at those assessment goals we're going to be focused on and then decide how we're going to assess that, when, what tools do we need, who's going to be responsible for assessing that, and so that they're prepared for it. From that, once we have all the baseline data collected on the children, then our plan is based upon what those individual classroom goals are. So then it turns into less of all this data we need to collect to more of a specific data. If we know children are meeting certain goals, we don't need to continually be collecting data on that. It sounds pretty basic, but it is something that we've had to really think to, like one of those aha moments. Oh yes, one of those lessons. The next thing that we needed to really carve out in our week was some time for teachers to really analyze the data, reflect on the data, and make it really specific so that we knew it was happening. We've think about what trends do we see, is progress being made, what are the next steps, and then what does this mean for planning. To help support that process, we created, what helped us at Imagine was to create what we call a planning brainstorm form. And again, I downloaded this just so people have a visual of what it is and if this might help other programs out there. And it just really helped us to come to the table before we were having conversations about curriculum, because we plan curriculum in teams, the teaching teams, that each individual had already thought about these things before coming together. Again, we have 2 classrooms, 2 teaching teams. One team likes to come together and do the form together, and then the next day come together to plan the curriculum. The other team likes to do that individually, and then the next day come together to discuss curriculum and to discuss what each of them wrote. I think always it's important to allow for those individual differences and what really works for teachers. What we just really sit down and talk about a lot. What's working, what's going to help you, how can we make this not an overwhelming process? Which comes back to our last lesson that we really learned is it takes a lot of support. In terms of, it was so helpful to have that support from, and we also had technical assistance around it. It was also, I think, important as an administrator to be always looking at the data. What is the skill level of the teacher? We do have certified teachers, but it does not mean that they come out of school really skilled at how to do an observation and then how to link that to the correct goal, the correct objective. So not to make those assumptions, but really see what their skills are and where they might need support. And then the other area is the data collecting was what needs to be collected. Are they spinning their wheels and collecting maybe too much on one thing or not enough on the other? Are there kids that are kind of falling through the cracks? So really having a system where that's being reviewed in an ongoing manner. And then from that information, taking time to reflect on that with the teachers, bring that feedback to them, decide how to support them in that process. It is a continual process that we're still always looking at and thinking of how to always do better in everything we do, and assessment is included. For the upcoming school year, our next goal is really how to get that family input in a more systematic way in an ongoing manner. And I guess that I don't think there's anything else I really need to say about that. I think I can turn it right now over to Jackie.
Thank you, Andrea. I think it was very important to, I think our question disappeared. There it is. Thank you. Did I don't know if I turned, I think I did it and then you did it too. Yeah, that's fine. Just correct me if I'm wrong. I think I heard you say that one of your classrooms is a state-funded pre-K. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So I just want to ask a couple questions related to that someone asked. And one of our participants asked if attendance data is also collected in that TS goal system.
So we do collect attendance data. We have not linked it and used it in a way where we linked it to child success or child outcomes. We used it more in a proactive manner where we were starting to see things and speaking with families. Fortunately, this past year, we didn't have any big attendance issues that would have impacted their learning.
Oh, that's always so interesting. That's wonderful that you didn't have big attendance issues. And I think this is a related question. How do you handle the data of those children in and out of a program or who transfer to other centers?
So we don't have with the pre-K, because it's a lottery, the state-funded pre-K is a lottery, so then it is no fee for families, that there's not a big, there isn't kids coming in and out. And our other classroom, we tend not to have that either, so that, but when children transition out of our program, especially when they go on to kindergartens, we do, Teaching Strategies Gold has a wonderful, prints up some nice reports that we're able to, if we know what school that child's going to, and get a release and sending that information directly to that school, or handing it to the parents and explaining what it is. Both instances we show the family and go review what we're giving to the school, but then at least giving it to the parents that they have something to hand to their next school.
And can you just talk a little bit about how you share data and information with parents? Because I know you just mentioned that you explain it to them as they can take it to the next center or their next school. But how do you? What's your normal course of events in using data with parents in your school?
So each time we share data, we do that 3 times a year, and we have parent-teacher conferences so that we can sit down with families, and I think that's a really important piece of it. We do give what we do first when we've just collected all the baseline data and we are just getting to know that child, is the teachers write up short paragraphs, one for each area of development, for each domain, about what the child's strengths are, what some areas of need are, and then so it is a kind of a long process for the teachers to type up those for all of the children, but it gives the parents a nice visual rather than seeing these complicated reports that get printed out from that Teaching Strategies Gold. So from there, with the families, then we have conversations about goals. So the next 2 times is a much shorter form where we just put previous goals, progress made towards the goals, and next steps. So then, again, those next steps are things that we discuss with the families, and that's generally how we share the information.
And related to assessment again, one participant wants to know if there are benchmarks and goals for alphabet knowledge, phonological awareness, and language development.
Absolutely. So there is a literacy section, and it goes through the alphabet, all those things. Yes.
And Andrea, I have one more.
Sure.
Go ahead. No, that's okay.
Oh, I was going to say it goes over all the areas of development, math, social emotional, literacy, language, math, science, social studies, cognitive.
Good, thank you. I don't want anybody to think that this is an infomercial for Teaching Strategies Gold. I know. It's just there's a fine line. And I just have one more question, and this would be important, I think, to many of our participants. How are people balancing the collection of data and the subsequent use of that data with the need of play-based approaches? And since you are the education director in a specific preschool, I think it's important to ask you this question.
So I think that's a great question. I think if you look at our planning brainstorm sheet, that was part of how that came to be, is not to lose sight of part of our curriculum is always that project-based learning. And when we became so focused on assessment, that was falling to the wayside. So we wanted to bring that up again so we weren't forgetting. So assessment was informing our curriculum. It wasn't driving it. We didn't want the assessment just to be driving the curriculum and feel like we were teaching to the test. So that we're thinking, what is the assessment data telling us? But also those same questions we were always thinking about is, what were the children really interested in this past week? What have they shown interest in? What can we build upon? What are some great projects that we might explore with them? What are some great questions? And thinking about those 2 things, then how are we going to plan curriculum? And with the assessment being integrated into children's daily activities, it is generally play-based assessment. So we're watching, we're seeing what they're doing in that play-based atmosphere. Very
Thank
rarely
you.
is it tell me what letters you know, and that's very rare.
So, Andrea, there is one request from a participant that you name the 6 domains that teachers summarize in meetings with parents. Could you name those again for us?
Absolutely. So the domains,
Sorry.
I'm not sure if I said 6 or not, but I think there's 9 domains and it's all based on Rhode Island Early Learning Standards. Because Teaching Strategies Gold is aligned to the standards, but that is what we plan on curriculum based on the standards. So it is language, literacy, math, physical health and motor development, social emotional development, social studies, science,
The arts.
the creative arts, and cognitive development is the last one.
Thank you. That
You're
wasn't a test, Andrea. But you did a good job.
Did I pass? No.
So, and just one more question, because I see we have 1 minute left in your time allotment. The strategies for collecting data on critical thinking and problem solving. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
So that, I think, goes back to that planning. So teachers know what goals they're going to be looking for in the week, and if it's something around problem solving and something around that particular goal, then they're definitely going to make sure that there's opportunity in the classroom that children are going to be having to problem solve, so that maybe or looking at what we're already planning, and then where are we going to observe problem solving? So are we going to really be watching block area that week, or are we going to set up a challenge in block area that week to spark kids, hopefully, that they can, will do some problem solving. Sometimes maybe it will be some, where we have kids work in small groups to have a particular challenge, like I don't know, I can't think of something off the top of my head, but give them that challenge with maybe they have to build something with specific materials or build a tower as tall as them, and they only have access to certain kind of materials, and how are they going to overcome that and problem solve and work as a team to do that. So that's really how we would assess that.
Sounds like you're actually building the foundation for those college-ready and career-ready skills.
Well, we try to really focus on that, so not to lose sight of, again, it's really easy to, when you're putting data into the goal, to go to the alphabet knowledge and the number knowledge and all those other things, but it does also include those executive functions and those critical thinking skills too.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm actually going to move into the discussion, the collaborative discussion, and I'd like to thank everybody, for our presenters, for all staying, and to the participants for all the questions that they've provided. And I'm going to start by going back to a question that, again, was asked, I think, around the first presentation, and it related to families. So I'm going to ask all 3 of you, and if you don't mind, so we're not talking over each other, I'll ask you to respond in the same order in which you presented. So we'll start with you, Jackie, and people may have more expertise than others, so if you really have nothing to say, you can certainly defer to the next presenter. Or we could also ask Claire Irwin, who is an early childhood researcher and a mom herself, to weigh in on it also. So the first question is, what tips would you offer to programs to help them share data effectively with families? Jackie, can we begin with you? Do you have something to add?
I think one of the keys is just regular communication and establishing the fact that you are going to be contacting them with information, and then I think trying to take a step back and think about what should be included in the progress reports. In the study that we examined, most of the preschools talked about providing written progress reports to parents, and just thinking about what information needs to be included in there to convey the the points that you're trying to make. So maybe it doesn't need to be every data element from an output, but highlighting the key components. And I would just want to point out there is the Harvard Family Research Project. It has information about and guidance about communicating with parents, so that's one possible resource.
Thank you. Judy?
I would say that one of our main areas of focus, or something that's become a larger area of focus around assessment and our work here at the state, is supporting programs and providers and thinking about creating a system of bidirectional communication with families and caregivers, so that very much like what Andrea is engaged in her program, so that parents are included in the process of assessment in terms of both being supported in their understanding of the expectations for children in terms of our standards, what we expect children to know and be able to do at every age, but also to feel like they can contribute to teachers' understanding of what children can know, what children know and are able to do. And when you think of very young children, and I have two of my own, I think I have lots of important information that could really help fill in what my teacher understands about what my children know and are able to do, just because the way that they express their knowledge and skills can be different depending on their context, when they're at home or when they're at school. And so I think being engaged in that process, coming to a consensus, saying, here's what I think about what my child can do, what do you think? And having that conversation being ongoing and then, formalized on occasion, so that, I have a good idea about whether or not my child is making progress in specific areas. But I think that is a huge piece. So it's not just sharing information with families, it's engaging families in the process of assessment.
Thank you, Judy. Andrea?
I would love to just build upon what Judy just said by saying I want to reiterate that I feel like that sit-down meeting that we have with families, although sometimes it can be challenging and means, teachers are working longer days, and we need to compensate them for that and make time for that. And but going through all that is so valuable, because then we do have that opportunity to say, so you read the progress report, do you have any questions? And that is how all our teachers begin every meeting, and so that we do open it up for those families. And we also talk a lot about making sure we stop and say, what do you see at home? Are you seeing this? What do you see? Even when we're talking about positive, great things, what do you see at home? Not just those, struggles that we're having, so that they're invited into the conversation, and then they know they're invited into the conversation. It also is definitely about building those relationships in an ongoing manner. We have the luxury of seeing families that pick up and drop off every day, so we make time for that. And then those progress notes, really thinking, and we've changed ours over the years to really, so it's not so time-consuming for teachers, but that it does give families what they need to know. We find handing them some report that's printing from Teaching Strategies Gold is too overwhelming, and it's too much information. They need, we definitely share that with them before we send it off to a program, to transition to kindergarten, or if we maybe we're preparing to go to a school department meeting if we have concerns about this child and we're going to share it. But then that's always done, again, verbally, so we're explaining and decoding it for them, so to speak.
Thank you. Now I have a topic that's a little bit controversial, and it's about administering standardized tests to young students. And one of our participants has asked during registration, should preschools be administering standardized tests to students? How much time should be spent testing children in kindergarten and pre-K classrooms? And someone else from Vermont asked, how much testing is too much testing? Who would like to begin that conversation? Jackie, would you like to begin?
No, I would say our study didn't touch on touch on the extent to which administrators or teachers thought the amount of testing that was done was appropriate. I will say that everybody indicated that the methods they used to examine early learning outcomes, and in this sample, as I said before, it was everything from a commercially available assessment to collecting, to writing down notes on Post-its about what they saw in the classroom, reviewing those at the end of a week, and including that information in progress reports. So in all cases, whether it was something that was an off-the-shelf instrument assessment or something that was just their notes and observations that they would align to domains, or in some cases they would put into the progress reports, they all found that the information they were gathering was sufficient. So I think I'll leave it at that, and maybe one of the other presenters would like to weigh in.
Judy, and then Andrea.
I would say that it's really important for programs to make sure that they have a clear vision for their assessment practices and the purposes for which they're assessing children, because the purpose is going to determine what kind of instrument you need to use and how often you need to use it. And I would say, you know, it's not even possible to talk about standardized tools as a thing, because there are some standardized tools that might be appropriate to use within the context of authentic assessment for the purposes of understanding children's growth and development toward early learning standards. That's entirely possible. There are also other standardized tools that are completely inappropriate for those purposes, so, and are meant to be used to either diagnose children or diagnose a delay, or you know, to understand children's how, you know, to understand program quality. You know, we use standardized assessments with our external evaluators to understand how our children are performing, or the impact that the program is having on their knowledge and skills in relationship to, you know, lots of other children across the country. And so, you know, I think I very strongly believe, and this is where we started with all of our agencies and related programs in terms of creating plans for assessment, is starting with the why. Why are we assessing children? What is the purpose? And then from there, you can really decide what kind of tools will help you meet those purposes. And from there, you know, the tools will define the timing and sequencing of implementation.
Thank you, Judy. Andrea?
So in terms of what we do at Imagine Preschool, we don't use standardized testing. That might happen if a child, if we're concerned about their development, and then, but that would be a referral from us to another agency, whether it's the school department or a place to get a neuropsych eval done, but that would not be us administering them. So again, I agree with Judy about the purpose, and I believe that the standardized testing at this age really should come if we're just really concerned about a child's development and it's gotten to the point where we need to really figure out what's going on. That for our purposes, we really feel like we can get everything we need using authentic assessment practices. And that way it's not taking away from their learning by having them having to step aside, be assessed, and more accurate.
And thank you, Andrea. I have one final question from Emily, one of our participants. This type of assessing is not a big shift for pre-K, but it could be a big change for early elementary teachers and administrators. What would be the best ways to support this shift for teachers and administrators in elementary schools? And Jackie, I think I'm going to let you off the hook for this one and actually ask Judy and Andrea to weigh in.
So this is a great question, because, and this is actually the spot where we're at in our work on assessment, because we've done a lot of work in our birth to 5 systems to align our approaches and make sure that what we're doing in terms of assessment is really appropriate for the settings. And you know, when you move into kindergarten through 3rd grade or early elementary schools, the setting changes, the expectations change, and and it's more disjointed, especially here in Rhode Island. Districts have a lot of latitude in terms of the assessments that they use. So where we've started is with our kindergarten entry assessment, which we are calling a kindergarten entry profile, and we're collaborating with an enhanced assessment grant consortium to develop a comprehensive system of tools and supports for teachers to conduct the process of formative assessment in their classrooms from kindergarten to third grade. And embedded in that process is a baseline setting set of tools that will help teachers in kindergarten figure out where children are when they enter kindergarten. But the process that teachers will use to understand what children know and are able to do when they enter kindergarten will be based on observing and collecting information about children across all of the essential domains. And so this is going to be really a change of pace for our kindergarten teachers. Not only are we going to be asking them to observe and document over the course of 6 weeks or so, we're also going to be asking them to look outside of their what they're used to assessing, which is language and literacy and math, and sometimes not even math. So we chose this route for our kindergarten entry profile because we understand the importance of developmentally appropriate assessment and the importance of assessing children comprehensively and covering all of the domains. But what we're recognizing is that this is going to take quite a bit of training and support to make sure that our teachers are really comfortable with and feeling confident not only about collecting the information and understanding where children are in terms of their knowledge and skills, but then also thinking about what that information means in terms of their instruction, and using the data in a way that will change what they do in the classroom in order to help children move forward from where they come into the classroom. So I think that the question is spot on. This is different than what happens in a lot of elementary schools, but I do think that in addition to our kindergarten entry profile, shifting our focus to transition, I think we're hoping that not only will we be supporting children and families and moving from pre-kindergarten programs to kindergarten, but that will also be supporting some alignment between our pre-K practices and kindergarten practices, doing some shared training between our pre-K and kindergarten teachers and administrators, and then using what we've learned and what we're doing in our pre-K programs to really support and change practice in our early elementary grades.
Andrea, do you have anything to add? I don't want to cut you off, but I'm looking at the time.
No, I think the only quick thing would be that I agree it would be about training, but also training for administrators of those elementary schools to really understand the process as well so they can support the teachers in those efforts.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank our three panelists, and now I'd like to turn it over to Claire, who she's been working very hard compiling your questions and making me look good. So Claire Irwin, I'm moving it over to you.
Great, thanks, Jackie. It's easy to make you look good. You make it easy. So, well, first, again, I want to also thank our panelists. This has been very engaging, a really exciting way to bring together and explore some of the work that we've done at REL, but also highlight the work that's going on in our region at the state level as well as at the program level. So this was very exciting. Thank you very much for keeping me busy and asking so many great questions during this webinar. If you have any additional questions, always feel free to reach out to us. Always feel free to check out our website that's been posted several times. And we think most of you have stuck through the entire webinar. You're jumping off now, but please do. We can only bring these great events to you by knowing your feedback. So please do fill out the SurveyMonkey. It's posted in the chat right now, and I think when we close, we'll actually be bumped right over to that survey. So if you could just take a couple more minutes of your time from today and let us know what you think about today's session and give us some feedback. That'd be wonderful. So again, thank you to everyone, and I should mention that the presentation will also be archived, and you'll be sent that archive to make sure that you don't miss it, and you can share away with other folks who weren't able to make it to today's session. So again, thank you, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.